In a quiet southern town, a young black woman vanished from view, not into the night, but into a crawl space barely tall enough to sit in. For 7 years, this woman hid just above the world that once claimed to own her, watching life unfold through a tiny peephole, waiting for the moment she could claim her freedom. This was an act of love, a calculated risk, and a refusal to surrender. But what forced her into such a life? What could push someone that far? And how did she turn pain into power? This is the powerful story of Harriet Jacobs. Before we begin, kindly take a moment to like this video. It helps more people find these hidden pieces of history, stories that deserve to be remembered, taught, and passed on. If you're moved by voices that were nearly erased, your support helps keep them alive. Now let's get into it. Harriet Ann Jacobs was born into slavery in the small town of Edenton, North Carolina, in 1813. Yet her earliest years were filled with love and relative comfort, giving little hint of the trials to come. Harriet's parents, Delilah and Elijah, were enslaved, but lived together in their own cabin and doted on Harriet and her younger brother John. Her father was a skilled carpenter who was allowed to hire out his labor. He dreamed of saving enough money to buy freedom for his children, a hope that sadly never materialized. Harriet's grandmother, Martha, was a formidable presence in her life, a resourceful, industrious woman who had managed to gain a small measure of independence by baking crackers at night to earn money. Protected by family, young Harriet did not initially understand the cruel reality into which she had been born. Harriet's legal status was that of human property, but as a little girl, she hardly felt the lash of slavery. Her first owner was a gentle mistress, Margaret Horniblow, who took Harriet into her household as a domestic servant, but treated the child with affection. This mistress even taught Harriet to read and spell, a rare privilege for an enslaved child, and one that Harriet would later recognize as a great gift. Harriet became an apt pupil, learning to sew and enjoying simple pleasures like gathering berries and flowers for her mistress. In these years, she felt as carefree as any other child, blissfully unaware of the shadow that slavery cast over her future. Indeed, the fragility of those happy days became apparent when Harriet was 6 years old and her mother fell gravely ill. On her deathbed, Harriet's mother extracted a promise from the kind mistress that her 2 children would never want for anything. Harriet's mother passed away, and Harriet mourned, still only a child, and just beginning to realize that she was not free. For a time, the benevolent mistress kept her word. Harriet wanted for nothing material and was spared harsh labor. But when Harriet was about 12, tragedy struck again. Her mistress fell sick and died. Harriet was devastated, having grown to love this woman almost as a mother. She prayed earnestly for her mistress's recovery, only to face the heartbreak of loss once more. Then came a new shock, a turning point in Harriet's young life. After the funeral, the will of the deceased mistress was read aloud. Instead of the freedom that some had optimistically anticipated for the devoted girl, Harriet learned that she had been bequeathed to a relative, the mistress's 3-year-old niece. At that moment, Harriet felt a sense of betrayal. She had loved her mistress and believed in her goodness. Yet in death, that woman treated Harriet not as a human child deserving liberty, but as an item of property to be passed down like a family heirloom. In that bitter moment, the illusion of security shattered for Harriet. She later tried to forgive this act of injustice, remembering the kindness her mistress had shown in life, but the sting of being willed away remained with her. And so, around the age of 12, Harriet Jacobs entered a new household and a new chapter of life, one that would prove far more cruel and dangerous. The little girl who had once not even known she was a slave now understood, with dread, that she belonged to someone else. She was sent to live in the home of her new owner, the infant Mary Matilda Norcom. In practice, of course, the real masters of the house were Mary's parents, Dr. James Norcom and his wife Maria. Harriet's grandmother and relatives feared what might happen to the girl in the Norcom household. Edenton was a tight-knit community. People knew Dr. Norcom as a prominent physician and also as a man of harsh, domineering temperament. Still, Harriet's family hoped for the best, and her father and grandmother prayed that the transition would not crush the bright spirit of the girl they loved. Harriet herself, at 12, could not yet imagine the full extent of the trials awaiting her. But as she packed her few belongings and left behind the only home she had known, a sense of foreboding accompanied her grief. Childhood innocence was ending, and the long shadows of slavery were closing around her. Harriet's worst fears about her new home soon proved true. The household of Dr. James Norcom was nothing like the gentle environment she had known. She now lived under the same roof as an enslaver, whose intentions toward her were malicious and predatory. Dr. Norcom was in his 50s, a respected physician in public but a tyrant in private. His wife, Maria Norcom, was an embittered woman prone to cruelty herself. In Harriet's first weeks in their home, she witnessed acts that shocked her young conscience, like Mrs. Norcom flying into rages and even taking sadistic measures to punish the household slaves for minor infractions. Harriet observed that this mistress, though weak in managing the household, could sit in her easy chair and see a woman whipped till the blood trickled, and would even contaminate the cooking utensils with spit, so the enslaved cook and children could not have the leftovers. Such scenes of daily indignity and violence impressed upon Harriet that she was now truly in slavery's grip, where kindness was in short supply. Yet the greatest threat to Harriet was not the mistress's temper, but the master's lust. As Harriet entered her adolescence, Dr. Norcom began to take a very improper interest in the attractive, intelligent young girl who served in his household. Harriet was around 14 when the doctor's behavior toward her changed from mere scolding or ordering chores to something far more sinister. Night after night, Harriet tried to dodge Dr. Norcom's lecherous advances. She was trapped, powerless under law to refuse him, yet determined in her soul to resist. The very idea of submitting to this man repulsed her. He was several decades her senior, the same man who claimed ownership of her body and labor. Now he insisted he had the right to her sexuality as well. The teenage girl mustered what courage she could, trying to rebuff him with silence, with feigned indifference, even with open hostility when she dared. Sometimes Dr. Norcom threatened her, fuming with rage when she resisted. Other times he tried to caress and cajole her, playing the part of a doting admirer. Through all this, Harriet lived in constant anxiety. She was forced to share a roof with her predator, never knowing when he might creep up behind her with another vile whisper or worse. Every waking moment she had to be on guard. What made this ordeal especially harrowing was Harriet's isolation. She felt she had no one to turn to for protection. For Harriet, telling her grandmother was out of the question. Her devout grandmother would be heartbroken and furious, and might even confront Dr. Norcom, which could make things even more dangerous. Mrs. Norcom, the mistress, was not a protector to Harriet either. Instead, the doctor's wife grew insanely jealous of the pretty young slave girl. The mistress viewed Harriet as competition for her husband's attentions, and as a result, Mrs. Norcom treated Harriet with suspicion and cruelty. In the slaveholding South, an enslaved girl in Harriet's position truly had no legal recourse and no safe harbor. The very people who should have defended a vulnerable girl, the law, her owners, were the source of the danger. And so young Harriet bore this burden largely alone, her childhood stolen overnight by the predatory whims of her master. Despite the terror enveloping her daily life, Harriet Jacobs was not passive. Even as a teenager, she possessed a fierce spirit and a keen sense of her own dignity. She plotted small rebellions against Dr. Norcom's domination. At one point, Harriet fell in love with a free black carpenter in town and resolved to marry him. When she innocently asked her master's permission to wed, as was required of slaves, Dr. Norcom exploded with rage. He flatly refused to allow it. Harriet was his property, and he would never permit another man to claim her or offer her a legitimate love that would put her out of his reach. Harriet was crushed by this denial of a normal life. Even the simple hope of a lawful marriage and family was forbidden to her. Still, she did not give in. If anything, Norcom's refusal only steeled Harriet's resolve to find some way to thwart his control over her body and fate. Harriet devised an audacious plan born of desperation. Since she could not avoid her master's lechery through conventional means, she would take control of her own sexuality in the only way she felt she could, by choosing a lover of her own. There was a white lawyer in town, Samuel Treadwell Sawyer, who had shown kindness and concern for Harriet's plight. He was unmarried and sympathetic. Over time, Harriet developed a friendship with him. She knew a sexual relationship with a white man outside of marriage violated all the proper norms she'd been taught, and she agonized over the decision. However, in a world that allowed her no true autonomy, she felt that this choice was her way of fighting back. If she yielded on her own terms to a man who might actually care for her, it would be a lesser evil than being violently forced by the man who owned her. In her eyes, consensual love, however illicit, was a defiance of abuse. Thus, as a teenager, Harriet Jacobs made the radical decision to enter into a relationship with Sawyer. By doing so, she hoped to achieve multiple aims: to snatch a measure of emotional comfort for herself, to enrage Dr. Norcom so he might decide to sell her away, thus ending his pursuit, and perhaps even to secure some protection for any children she might bear. Harriet became pregnant at age 16. For once, she felt a small triumph over her tyrant. The news of Harriet's pregnancy had exactly the effect on Dr. Norcom that she predicted. He was livid, but he did not react by selling her, as slaves might have expected. Instead, he grew more determined to break her will. Harriet gave birth to a baby boy, whom she named Joseph. Despite the shame she had been conditioned to feel by society's standards, Harriet loved her son dearly and took solace in knowing Dr. Norcom was not the father of this child. Her act of defiance had come at a cost, however. Her reputation and self-esteem suffered, and she still remained in Norcom's power. She had hoped he might be willing to sell her to the baby's father, Mr. Sawyer, but Norcom refused. In the ensuing months, Harriet's situation only became more complicated and dangerous. She had dared to carve out a degree of freedom over her own body, but Dr. Norcom answered her challenge with redoubled cruelty. To keep Harriet away from his enraged wife's notice, and perhaps to isolate her further, Dr. Norcom concocted a scheme. He promised Harriet he would build a small cottage for her outside of town where she could live separate from his main household. The implication was clear. He intended to force her into a secluded life as his concubine. Harriet, of course, saw this as no better than a prison where she would be at his mercy. She was approaching her 19th year, determined not to become the plaything of this man. As Norcom pressed his plans on her, Harriet knew she had to act fast to protect herself and her child. In another twist, Harriet became pregnant a second time by Sawyer. The birth of her daughter, Louisa, only heightened her desperation. Holding her baby girl in 1833, Harriet felt a wave of despair for the child's future. Knowing what awaited her innocent baby girl if they remained under Norcom's dominion filled Harriet with fierce resolve. She could not let this fate befall her children. Dr. Norcom, meanwhile, was furious that Harriet had borne another man's child yet again. He vented his rage by subjecting Harriet to physical abuse. In one terrifying incident, he seized a pair of scissors and sheared off Harriet's long hair, a cruel attack on her femininity and pride. On another occasion, in a fit of anger, he hurled her down a flight of stairs, injuring her so badly she was bedridden for days. Norcom even swore he'd never strike her again after that, only to break that promise as Harriet knew he would. The torment escalated to the point that Harriet feared for her life and the lives of her little ones. She learned that Norcom planned to wrench her children away and send them to work as field slaves on his remote plantation as soon as they were old enough. This was a common punishment enslavers used against defiant slaves, destroying their family ties. For Harriet, that was the final straw. If Norcom carried out his threat, not only would her children suffer the grueling life of plantation slavery, but Harriet herself would lose any leverage she had and likely be forced into that cottage of shame he had envisioned. In 1835, Harriet Jacobs made a fateful decision. She would run away. However, this would not be a straightforward escape northward, because Harriet's situation was extremely precarious. She did not intend to abandon her children. Rather, she hatched a daring plan to save them by sacrificing herself. Harriet knew that if she simply fled to the Free States without her son and daughter, Dr. Norcom would surely punish the children in retribution or sell them off. On the other hand, if she disappeared but stayed nearby in secret, perhaps the Norcoms would come to despair of ever finding her, and in their frustration, sell her children, hopefully to their father Sawyer, who had indicated he would buy them. This plan was full of risks and uncertainties, but Harriet saw no other way. Every attempt to legally purchase her freedom or that of the children had failed. Dr. Norcom flatly refused hefty offers from friends and family who tried to negotiate. He was obsessed with bending Harriet to his will and would not relinquish his claim on her or the children. Knowing this, Harriet concluded that only by removing herself from his reach might she secure a better future for her son and daughter. Thus, at the age of 21, after nearly 7 years of harassment and psychological torture, Harriet Jacobs resolved to escape from her master's house. It was an incredibly bold move, for the town of Edenton was small and bristling with slave catchers. Any lone black person without papers risked being seized. Harriet confided in a few trusted friends and relatives who helped arrange hiding places for her. Late one June night in 1835, Harriet slipped out of the Norcom house. She left behind her children, Joseph, a toddler, and baby Louisa, an agonizing choice only a mother in bondage could be forced to make. Though it broke her heart not to take them, Harriet understood that fleeing with infants was nearly impossible and would surely lead to all of them being caught. She trusted her grandmother and uncle to watch over the children. With tears in her eyes and iron determination in her heart, Harriet stole into the darkness. Her life as a fugitive had begun. On the run in 1835, Harriet Jacobs faced an uncertain and dangerous future. In the immediate aftermath of her escape from Dr. Norcom's house, she found refuge wherever she could, sometimes in the homes of sympathetic neighbors, both black and white, and at one point in a swampy thicket outside town. The North Carolina woods and swamps harbored fugitives known as Maroons, and for a few days Harriet hid in a nearby swamp to throw off her pursuers. Dr. Norcom was furious when he discovered her missing. He launched a manhunt, assuming Harriet must be lurking somewhere nearby or trying to reach the north. The hue and cry for a runaway young mother circulated quickly. Harriet's friends smuggled food to her and helped her evade the patrols. She knew, however, that she couldn't survive indefinitely moving from spot to spot. She needed a more secure hiding place, one where she could remain unseen for as long as it took for Norcom's search to subside and for her children to be safe. In this desperate moment, Harriet's family proved instrumental. Her Aunt Martha owned a tiny house on the edge of town. Though technically a free black woman, Aunt Martha's movements were still under scrutiny because of her close ties to enslaved kin. Still, inside her own home, there was a possibility of harboring Harriet beyond the prying eyes of slave catchers. So a bold plan was set in motion. They would hide Harriet in her grandmother's attic crawlspace. Harriet's Uncle Philip, a skilled carpenter like his father, surreptitiously prepared the hiding spot. At the top of a small shed attached to Aunt Martha's house was an unfinished attic or garret beneath the roof. It was a cramped, rough space that had been used only for storage, inhabited mainly by rodents. Uncle Philip secretly installed a trap door in the ceiling of a storeroom that opened into this crawl space. If Harriet could get in without anyone noticing, she could remain concealed there indefinitely, literally above the heads of those who might hunt for her. One evening, under cover of darkness, Harriet slipped into her new sanctuary. The entrance was barely large enough for her body to squeeze through. As the trap door shut, Harriet found herself in total darkness and stifling heat. This tiny area would become her home for nearly 7 years. In this small space, Harriet could not stand up or even sit straight in most of it. The roof's rafters angled down to meet the floor, so that the only area with a 3-foot clearance was at the peak. A bed, really just some straw and old quilts, was laid on the floor for her. Harriet could only lie on her side. If she tried to turn or lie on her back, she'd bump her head or shoulders against the rafters. The first night, rats and mice skittered over her as she lay in silence, but exhaustion and sheer relief at being safely hidden allowed her a brief escape in sleep, despite the vermin. When morning came, Harriet awoke to absolute blackness. In that hot, airless crawl space, she could not tell night from day, except by the sounds of roosters crowing or the faint bustle of the streets outside. She was sealed away from sunlight, and the air was stagnant and suffocating. Soon, the temperature climbed. The North Carolina summers are brutally warm, and under a thin roof of shingles, the garret turned into an oven each day. Harriet's lungs burned for fresh air, and sweat soaked her clothes. She was weak from days of hiding, but not comfortless, because through the boards, she could hear the voices of her beloved children below. Yes, Aunt Martha had managed to buy Harriet's children from the Norcom family with money provided by Mr. Sawyer, the father of Harriet's children. Not long after Harriet disappeared, Mr. Sawyer indeed purchased little Joseph and Louisa from Dr. Norcom, who sold them to recoup some of his losses. Although Sawyer had not formally freed the children, he allowed them to live with Aunt Martha for the time being. This was a tremendous relief to Harriet. Her gamble was paying off so far. Hearing the patter of her sons' and daughters' feet and their innocent laughter as they played in the yard gave Harriet comfort amid her darkness. For their safety, she dared not reveal herself. To her children, ages 2 and 4, their mother had vanished. Harriet's family took great risks to sustain her in hiding. By night, they would quietly open the trap door and pass food and water up to her. Sometimes, if the coast was clear, one of them would climb into the crawl space to sit with her in the dark for a short while, whispering news and words of comfort. These furtive visits had to be brief and only at night, for during daytime any noise risked drawing attention. In the oppressive summer heat, Harriet suffered terribly. She was plagued by swarms of tiny red insects that bit her skin incessantly, leaving her with rashes and intolerable itching. Aunt Martha prepared herbal remedies to send up through the trap door, and after weeks of misery, those pests subsided. But new torments came with the changing seasons. Summer gave way to autumn, and though the cooler air was a relief, Harriet's cramped muscles often ached, and her joints stiffened from lack of movement. At times, her limbs would swell painfully whenever she tried to crawl around. She was gradually losing muscle tone and health due to confinement. When winter arrived, the temperature in the little attic plummeted. The shingles offered scant insulation, and cold wind crept through every crack. Harriet had only coarse blankets. She shivered through the nights, sometimes finding her bedding damp with dew or rain that leaked in. On stormy nights, water dripped through the roof, soaking her and everything around her. The family would do their best to cover the roof from inside with mats to catch the water, but they couldn't risk obvious repairs from outside. Harriet endured soaking rains and freezing cold in that miserable hole, which aggravated her aches and pains. Despite these hardships, Harriet's spirit did not break. She sought ways to make her situation more bearable and to keep her mind occupied. One small victory came when her Uncle Philip accidentally left a tool in the crawl space after installing the trap door. It was a small hand tool for boring holes, a gimlet. Feeling around one day in the dark, Harriet's hand closed on this little piece of iron, and she was elated. Carefully, she set about drilling a peephole in the wall of the attic. Each night she would scratch away a bit more wood, holding herself back during daytime to avoid detection. Eventually, she managed to carve a tiny opening, perhaps only an inch or two wide, on the side of the shed that faced the street. Through this chink, the first fresh breath of outside air wafted in, and Harriet felt rejuvenated. More importantly, she now had a vantage point. By pressing her eye to the peephole, she could glimpse the outside world, a sliver of street, a patch of sky. She waited eagerly for the sight of her children playing in the yard below. The first time little Joseph and Louisa wandered into view, Harriet's heart nearly burst. It was as if her son and daughter sensed their mother's loving gaze, even if they couldn't see her. This precious window of vision and light did wonders for Harriet's morale. She watched the world by day, the comings and goings on the street, the change of seasons in a small patch of sky. By positioning her Bible or a book near the aperture, she could even read in the dim light and sew small garments to pass the time. Meanwhile, Dr. Norcom was not giving up on recapturing Harriet. Unaware that she was in fact hiding right under his nose, he concocted theories that she had escaped north. He even went so far as to send letters and agents to New York, and at one point traveled to New York City himself in pursuit of rumors of Harriet's whereabouts. Harriet learned of these developments from her Aunt Nancy, who still worked in the Norcom household and quietly relayed information. On one occasion, Harriet peeked through her tiny spy hole and actually saw Dr. Norcom walk down the street, heading to the docks to catch a steamboat north. She felt a surge of relief knowing he was, for a time, far away from Edenton, and even greater satisfaction that he was wasting his time and fortune on wild goose chases. Harriet's ruse was working so well that even her own children began to believe their mother was truly gone to the north. One bittersweet day, after Dr. Norcom returned from another failed search up north, young Joseph spotted the doctor passing by their gate. The innocent child piped up, asking, "Did you bring my mother home? I want to see her." At this, the cranky old slave master exploded in anger, shouting at the child and threatening him. Harriet's heart ached at how her little boy openly yearned for her. She longed to rush out, scoop him into her arms, and tell him she was right there. But she knew the time was not yet ripe. And so the months turned into years. What Harriet had thought might be a short-term hiding place became a 7-year ordeal. The psychological strain of such prolonged isolation was immense. Harriet experienced waves of despair, times when she felt stupefied and listless, as though her mind were numbing itself to cope. In other moments, she was racked with impatience and claustrophobia, feeling she could hardly endure another day, entombed while freedom lay just beyond her reach. She yearned for sunlight on her face, for a full breath of air, for the ability to walk freely down the street, holding her children's hands. These simple human joys were denied to her as long as she remained a fugitive in the South. The physical toll also accumulated. Years of scant exercise left Harriet permanently affected, her muscles atrophied and her joints in pain. In the attic, her health sometimes reached crisis points. On more than one occasion, illness nearly killed her in that hole. Fevers and sickness could not be treated openly. Aunt Martha had to tend her in secret, praying her moans wouldn't escape the walls. Through all this, Harriet's unwavering purpose was the only thing that sustained her. She was doing this for her children, to secure a better life for them, and ultimately for herself. While Harriet hid, the outside world changed slowly. Her faithful grandmother grew older and frailer, always worrying that Harriet might be caught. Her brother John managed to escape north and later became active in the abolitionist movement, which gave Harriet another glimmer of hope. Maybe someday he could help her when the time came to flee for good. Mr. Sawyer, the father of Harriet's children, had by now been elected to the U.S. Congress. He left North Carolina for Washington, D.C., taking their daughter Louisa with him to give her a life in the North. However, he did not formally emancipate Louisa or Joseph, a fact that troubled Harriet greatly. Still, having Louisa out of the South was some consolation. All the while, Harriet maintained a cunning correspondence with Dr. Norcom. From her hiding place, she penned letters and had them mailed from distant northern cities with the help of friends to mislead Norcom into thinking she really had fled to the Free States. These tricks deepened his conviction that she was gone. By the early 1840s, Dr. Norcom had finally lost his immediate interest in Edenton searches and turned his focus elsewhere, though he still nursed a vendetta to recapture Harriet someday. As the 7th year of Harriet's concealment approached, she felt her health deteriorating and her patience nearing its limit. She wrote later that sometimes she feared she would die in that tiny space without ever tasting freedom. But Providence intervened in the form of a friend named Peter, a trusted black sailor and ally. In the summer of 1842, Peter managed to secretly visit Harriet and brought astonishing news. He had found an opportunity to smuggle her out of the South if she dared take the risk. A vessel was soon to sail from the port of Edenton, bound for Philadelphia. The captain was sympathetic and willing to hide Harriet among the cargo. Peter told her she had 2 weeks to decide. Harriet's heart pounded with excitement and fear as she listened. This was the chance she had dreamed of, the chance to truly escape to the north. But immediately, her thoughts went to her now 9-year-old son, Joseph. He was still in Edenton, living with Aunt Martha. If she left now, what about him? Harriet told Peter she was afraid of what Dr. Norcom or his family might do to her son if she disappeared for good. Peter urged her to reconsider. He argued that Joseph was actually relatively safe now. Mr. Sawyer had nominally bought the boy, so Joseph could likely be sent north to join her later. And if Harriet passed up this opportunity, another might never come. It was the most wrenching decision of Harriet's life. She spent days and sleepless nights in prayer and thought. In the end, Harriet concluded that she had done all she could for her children by hiding locally these many years. Her daughter was already in the north. Her son, while still in the south, was in the hands of family and a father who cared for him. If she stayed in the attic much longer, She might not survive or might be discovered. Then all would be lost. Summoning every ounce of courage, Harriet told her family of Peter's plan and her intention to seize the chance. They were fearful, but understood. Aunt Martha, though sorrowful to send her away, agreed it was time. They quietly made preparations. One dark night in the late summer of 1842, the attic trap door opened for what they hoped was the last time. Harriet's limbs were so stiff that her brother and uncle had to help lift her out. For the first time in nearly 7 years, Harriet stood upright under the open sky, breathing in the night air of freedom. She embraced Aunt Martha, tears flowing silently. Aunt Martha pressed a packet of food and a little money into her hand, along with her blessings and fervent prayers. With that, Harriet Jacobs slipped out of Edenton and onto the road to freedom. In 1842, after 7 years hidden in an attic, Harriet Jacobs finally escaped. Her body was frail, but her will had never been stronger. Peter helped her slip out of Edenton under cover of darkness and onto a ship headed north. Hidden in the cargo hold, she couldn't move or make a sound. Every creak, every footstep above could have meant discovery and return to slavery. But the voyage brought her to Philadelphia, and for the first time in her life, she stepped onto free soil. Still, freedom was uncertain. Harriet moved cautiously from Philadelphia to New York, reuniting with her daughter Louisa and later her son Joseph. But the passage of the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act made her a target again, legally vulnerable even in the North. She changed cities, lived under aliases, and leaned on abolitionist allies like her brother John and Quaker activist Amy Post. Eventually, she found steady work in the Willis household in New York, where Cornelia Willis, her employer, became a friend and protector. In 1852, when her former enslavers came looking, Cornelia secretly paid $300 to buy Harriet's legal freedom. At that moment, Harriet was stunned, but she also felt a weight lift. For the first time in her life, she could exhale. She was no longer property. Her children were safe, and though her journey had nearly broken her, Harriet Jacobs had won the battle she began in that attic. In the quiet evenings of her life as a free woman, Harriet Jacobs turned to the pen. Working in the North as a domestic caregiver, she began writing down everything she had endured. Childhood in slavery, sexual harassment, the attic years. The result would be one of the most important books ever written about American slavery, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. It was the first full-length narrative by a formerly enslaved black woman that confronted, in plain terms, the abuse and moral trauma faced by women in bondage. Harriet didn't have a literary background, and she wasn't seeking fame. But with encouragement from her friend and abolitionist Amy Post, she decided to speak for the countless women who couldn't. She used a pen name, Linda Brent, and changed the names of people and places, partly for safety and partly to create some emotional distance. The story poured out over several years in raw, vivid detail. Her years in hiding, her love for her children, and the constant psychological toll of being considered property. Slavery is terrible for men, she wrote, but it is far more terrible for women. After finishing her draft in the late 1850s, Harriet struggled to find a publisher. She first reached out to Harriet Beecher Stowe, who declined to help, but writer and abolitionist Lydia Maria Child agreed to edit and support the book. With her help, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl was finally self-published in 1861. It was released just months before the Civil War began, and though it was overshadowed by the conflict, those who read it were deeply moved. When the Civil War broke out, Harriet Jacobs was nearly 50, an age by which she had already endured more than most would in a lifetime. But even in freedom, she never stopped fighting for others. Alongside her daughter Louisa, she became a relief worker for newly freed people fleeing slavery. In Alexandria, Virginia, she helped distribute food, clothing, and medical care to those now known as contrabands, escaped slaves sheltering behind Union lines. Harriet, once hidden in an attic, now stood in the open as an advocate, writing newspaper reports like Life Among the Contrabands, to urge the public to see these people not as victims, but as neighbors in need of dignity and support. After the war, she didn't rest. She helped open schools, including one in her hometown of Edenton, a place where she had once been hunted. Returning there, this time as a free woman helping build a new future, brought profound emotional closure. But the world was slow to honor her. Harriet lived modestly, working as a caregiver and running a boarding house in Massachusetts. When she died in 1897, few knew that she had written one of the most important first-hand accounts of American slavery. Her book, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, quietly endured, rediscovered in the 20th century and confirmed as authentic by scholar Jean Fagan Yellen. It became a cornerstone of Black women's history. Harriet's account gave voice to the sexual violence, maternal struggle, and quiet resistance that defined so much of slavery, but had long been ignored. Her words, once nearly forgotten, now resonate in classrooms, libraries, and the hearts of readers who see themselves in her fight. Today, we remember Harriet Jacobs, not just for surviving, but for speaking. She transformed pain into power and memory into movement. She may not have lived to see monuments raised in her name, but she built something far more lasting, a truth that could not be buried. If Harriet Jacobs' story moved you, please take a moment to like this video. It helps more people discover the lives and legacies that history books too often leave behind. Subscribe to the channel for more true stories of courage, survival, and resistance. And if there's someone in your life who needs to know who Harriet Jacobs was, share this with them. Her story deserves to be remembered, retold, and passed on. What part of Harriet's journey stayed with you most? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.